Living with a chronic respiratory condition doesn't mean giving up the things you love to do. At Blue Zone Health, we're here to help you breathe easier and rebuild your strength. Our online cardiopulmonary rehab program offers tailored exercises, self-management training, and expert support from certified respiratory therapists. Accessible anytime, it's designed to reduce breathlessness, improve lung function, and empower you, all while connecting you with a supportive community. Visit bluezone.health and take the first step towards stronger lungs and a healthier future. Blue Zone Health. Breathe better, live better. Hey everybody, it's good to be back on the Cozy Lung Lounge. We are here with a special guest, Bob Rawlins, and we're really excited for you to be here. So thanks for coming in.
Thank you for letting me be here.
And we have Gina and Kelly on here as well. So it's good to see them. Today we're going to be talking with Bob about his health journey. I met Bob a little while ago at a race up in Ohio with Right2Breathe. We were doing spirometry for people, and we immediately became pretty good friends, and we often refer to him now as Cowboy Bob. As you can see, he loves his cowboy hat, and he's really awesome. He's been involved in many different organizations and foundations that revolve around lung disease and help with the coping of that journey. He's also a member of the Right2Breathe Foundation. He is on the board of directors, and then also is in many different support groups with the Cleveland Clinic in Cleveland, and is a member of the PFF, or the Pulmonary Fibrosis Foundation. And then he's also a blog writer, and he works with several different medical companies with that and loves discussing lung health and also living with lung disease. So we're really excited for you to be here. He is also a double lung transplant patient, and so we want to hear all about your health journey, and we're really excited you're here with us.
Oh, well, thank you so much. Yeah, it's been an interesting journey, to say the least. But it's been a good one. Ups and downs, like everybody would have. It probably started back in 2015. I want to say I had some earlier damage in my ears because it was called a bilateral vestibular neuritis. And that was, I had got a virus that went into my ears, and it ended up doing irreparable damage to the equilibrium nerve. So for about 18 months, I had to go through, rehab and stuff like that to kind of get the mind to say, don't listen to the left side, the right side is right. And, just get through that whole coping with that. And I guess while I was going through that, I ended up having a relapse, and it was kind of weird because I was coming back from New Jersey after visiting some family and friends, and I bent over, and when I came back up, I was like, wow, the world was spinning again. And I'm just kind of like, oh boy, here we go again, right? So I couldn't drive or anything, so I went to the hospital, and long story short, I came back and went back to the Cleveland Clinic. They did some more testing and found out that I had bilateral vestibular neuritis, which was in both ears. And I got to tell you, I don't wish that on my worst enemy. It was just one of those things that I was walking around the house with a walker, and the only fixation I could get without spinning was if I would watch the TV, which I'm kind of like, that was torture in itself, because I'm not always watching some of the things on TV, but I had to fixate on something, and that could stop me from doing that. And at the same time, I was on high doses of prednisone, which was about 60 milligrams a day. So during that process, it went into January of 2016, I guess. And what happened was I caught another virus, and I think the prednisone that was there just kind of like weakened my immune system a bit. And what happened was another virus had entered, and they weren't sure what it was, but I went in doing my physical therapy again, and this wonderful woman, Kelly, was my PT, and she was fabulous. And I was shaking like a leaf, and she just said, boy, Bob, what's going on? And I said, I don't know. And so she put a pulse ox on my hand, and my oxygen was 60. So that's pretty low, because if most people understand that your oxygen usually needs to be in that 92 and above area. So 60 was pretty low, and obviously it created some alarm with people. And so obviously there was no working out that day. I actually went into the emergency room, and from that point on, after CT scans and all that kind of stuff, they just said that I remember looking. The one doctor was there. She was really nice, and she showed me the scan. And she looked at it, and when the doctor turns around, you're sitting in the room, and she goes, "Boy, I've never seen this before." And I raised my hand. I said, "Hey, doc, I'm right here." And she goes, "Yeah, I know, Bob." I said, "This is just, you got to look at this." And I'm like, "Okay, let's look at it." Well, when you looked at it, you couldn't see lungs. You just saw white infection across my lungs. So something had invaded that. And they put me on oxygen. So from that point on, I was on a minimum of 3 liters of oxygen. And they put me in the hospital. And then for several days, they kept messing around with these machines. It seemed like, every day there'd be a new machine that would come in, and another machine would come in. And if people that have been on oxygen before and they've been in the hospital, they can kind of relate to the fact that, they bring a machine in to help you breathe, because you need to have the oxygen, like I said, to keep it up as high as you possibly can, because you don't want it to damage any other organs in your body. All right. Because oxygen is like the main thing that flows through your whole system and keeps everything healthy and running properly. So I was having problems with that. And each machine that came in couldn't get me above like 80 or 81. And they kept doing it. And every day it was harder and harder. So I ended up getting put on a ride on a helicopter up to the main campus in Cleveland Clinic. And I didn't remember much about it, because I told the guy with my vestibular neuritis and that kind of like craziness, I said, "I don't know how I'm going to handle a helicopter ride." So they put me out, and I didn't remember any of it, which is a bummer, because I like flying in helicopters. But anyway, I got there, and they put me in, intensive care. And I remember I had right off the bat, I had to get a ventilator put in, and it was kind of uncomfortable. And I was doing, crazy things like, "I don't want this," I was trying to get it out. And even though I knew the guys were saying, "Hey, Bob, this is going to help you." But when you have that foreign object in your mouth, and it's going down your throat, and you're first of all, you're freaked out, and anxiety is running at a high, and you're sitting there going, "Okay, am I really going to do this?" Right. So they ended up giving me the Michael Jackson drug. And I am going to tell you right now that I was kind of disappointed, because when I got off of the Michael Jackson drug and I came out of my induced coma, I really was not very good at the moonwalk. And I was kind of bummed out about that. I figured, well, at least if I was on the Michael Jackson drug, I could learn how to moonwalk properly. Okay.
You would think.
And yeah, and it just didn't work. I still practice. I got it down a little bit better, but I'm more country than I am Michael Jackson. But anyway. So the funny thing is besides all that, I had another challenge. It was ARDS. And ARDS is a relatively difficult disease. I was also on with the government. They were bringing up different things, and ARDS seemed to be one of the topics of conversation that scientists and doctors and things like that were really, really interested in knowing more and more about. And it's one of those things that, you really don't know how. Now, they're getting better now than it was back then. But back then, the best way they knew how to treat it was through high doses of steroids. And it was, again, while I'm reading, I read about a lot of this in my journal afterward and talking to my doctors afterward, because I was still right in a coma as they were trying to get me out of the ARDS thing. Well, I do remember that when I woke up and I looked around the room, there was a lot of people in my room. Okay. My family from Florida, my family from Canada, a couple of good buddies. And I couldn't really talk because I was kind of weak. And I sat there, and the first thing I'm thinking in my mind is, Somebody's having a party in my room and I'm not invited. Okay. So I'm like, what's going on? So all these people were around here. Well, as it was, were giving me about a gram of steroids a day, which is about as high as you can get. And they did it for about 3 days. And it was just one of those things. And at that time, I had about a 15% chance of surviving. So I later learned that my family had come in, most of them thinking they were going to say goodbye. And I didn't know the better or the worse of it because I woke up and I just was like, we're having a party and that's great. And everybody's hanging out. I couldn't talk. I was really weak. Anybody that's been on or goes, you know what? You don't have to be afraid of a ventilator. I wish I would have known something about it, but you're not going to know about it unless you've been through it. And they're not going to put you on a ventilator unless you really are starving for oxygen, right? But if anybody would ever think, and I've talked to several people afterwards where they've said that their family members are being placed on a ventilator. And I just tried to tell them, well, this is what's going to help them. You got to try to let them know what's going on so they don't panic. And they just understand that it's there to give you the proper oxygen that you need to help your system, right? So after I got through all that, it was pretty good. And then I was there, I think, in the ICU for about, I think, 8 weeks. Then I was discharged into a LTAC, which is like a lower, because I couldn't get into the regular rehab because I wasn't on 3 liters of oxygen. So I had to go to an LTAC, which was a lower area for rehab. Okay. And they would take me, and then I could, go in there and try to get some physical rehabilitation and things along those lines, which was helpful. And then I finally got released. But I got to share one thing. I remember this, and you can never know too much about what's going on, but then you don't want to like get yourself so crazy with Google. I was in the digital marketing field for a long time in healthcare, and Cleveland Clinic was one of my accounts. And everybody today self-diagnoses themselves. It's like a thing, right? You feel like this. My friends do it. Oh, I got cancer because I got a headache in my neck. It's like, no, you don't have cancer, okay? But you go on there and you start reading stuff, and there's always the good, the bad, the medium in between, right? So if you go out there, you just want to be open-minded. It's very good to be aware of what you're going through so you can ask the questions with your doctor, and very much be involved with your doctor. You should be involved in understanding what the treatments are that they're providing and why they're providing those treatments. And you should ask those questions. But if you get to a point where you trust your doctors and the people and the nurses that, oh my gosh, the nurses are the best thing in the whole wide world, are so good at knowing what you need. That's the whole kick, because then I got into this positive attitude routine. And when I started writing, I was like, the first line I always said is the most important thing is having a positive tude, Tude. So I talked about the tude all the time. If you don't have the tude, then you need to find it, because if not, you can let yourself get into a situation where you become depressed and you become like, oh man, you're allowed to have that woe is me, you're allowed to have that why me, you're allowed to have that. But I never had that long. I just figured, you know what, this is another challenge. And the way I looked at things, and I still do today, even when I was working a lot, I always thought that, a challenge brings upon another opportunity. And if you accept that challenge, at the end of it, while it's going on, during it, you're going to find an opportunity within that challenge. All right. My challenge for that was, trying to get back to at least a good, healthy place that I could get out of the hospital. I'm going to have to live with oxygen. And, the opportunity was, okay, how am I going to turn around and live the best life that I possibly could on oxygen 24/7? All right. What am I going to be able to do? Am I going to limit myself? Am I going to sit around the house and just go, well, I'm weak, I'm tired, and oxygen is making me tired, and I'm going to be afraid to get up? No, I wanted to turn around and say, okay, I'm going to use that bike. All right. And I have the other one still, Amy, and
Good.
I still sit and I still use it, but I just built up all the time, right? So that I could turn around and do the things that I wanted to do. So with the positive attitude, I ended up volunteering at the hospital. And what was so cool about that is, even though I was carrying the big, I called them, what do I call them? Ollie the oxygen tank. All right. I was pulling him through the hallways, and I would introduce him to all my pulmonary patients. I would go and say, hey, I'm Cowboy Bob, and this is Ollie, my oxygen tank. And they would go, oh, and I'd go, yeah. And I said, this guy is with me, and this keeps me doing things every single day. So I would then got to a point where sometimes, instead of delivering magazines and newspapers, I had some people that were starting to get on oxygen, and they go, hey, Bob, you know what? I don't want a newspaper. I don't want a magazine, but I'd love to talk about oxygen. And I'm like, you know what? One of my favorite subjects right now. So let's just talk about oxygen. And so I did that for 6, 7 years. And in that time, I used that to hopefully inspire people, but also it was great, like, what do I say, rehabilitation for me, because then I got to turn around and share with people like the things that I was doing. I remember seeing a mom one time. I walked in and her cannula was on her nose. I mean, off out of her nose and on her mouth. And her daughter was sitting there. And, I said, hey, aren't you supposed to have that thing in your nose? I said, I see your oxygen's running. You're supposed to have it in your nose. And she goes, nah, I'm just not wearing this. It's just ridiculous. And I'm like, okay, ridiculous. Okay, that's kind of a strong word. I said, but can you tell me why it's ridiculous? She goes, well, I don't want to get dependent on it. I'm like, all right, well, let's just talk about a story for a second. All right. Let you and I leave the room, and we're going to leave your daughter in here. And then I'm going to go over to the front desk, and I'm going to ask them to turn off all the oxygen that's going into that room. Now, your daughter's really healthy, right? So let me ask you a question. How long is your daughter going to last in that room with no oxygen? And she just stopped and she looked at me, and she goes, well, probably not long. I said, no. I said, we need oxygen, right? You're not dependent on it. It's kind of like it's like a blood pressure pill. They give you blood pressure because your blood pressure is high, and it keeps it down to a level where hopefully it keeps everything else going for you. But that's the same thing. You're getting oxygen because your body needs it. All right. So you need to turn your attitude into a positive attitude. Do you have grandchildren? She goes, oh, I have a grandson that I really, really love. I said, well, here's a good idea. Put the oxygen back in your nose, breathe like you're supposed to breathe, and think about your grandson. I see the picture on the table over there. And I said, that's what you need to keep thinking about, is having that oxygen with you all the time. And you have something to talk about with your grandson. He can have fun with you about it. And then you can continue to keep going and doing what you need to do. So, some of the joys of doing things like that, I left the room and she was fine. And her daughter comes out. And I turned her, I said, yeah. And she just immediately hugged me. And she said, Bob, she hasn't listened to anybody. And I said, well, you know what? Sometimes it takes a fellow user to kind of get to people and understand, what it is and why we have to do what we got to do. So those were some of the things, some of the stories that I had, and it happened quite a bit, where I could share that with people and try to get them to understand. And then I showed them pictures of when I was water skiing with my backpack on and my candle in my nose. And they were like, well, what? I said, yeah. I said, if I fall, the oxygen tank melt, it floats and the candle will come out. I said, and then you can also go snow skiing. So I showed a picture of a snow skiing. I actually went with my doctor, and he was a more nervous wreck than I was. He said, "Where's your oxygen now, Bob?" I go, "Alan, it's fine." I said, "I'm good." He goes, "Okay, well, not so much like pulling and stuff." And I'm like, "Okay, but we got to get over to the chairlift, so we can get on it, so we can go back up and come down again." And then I was also roughing soccer still with the kids. I had a 40-foot, 50-foot cord, and I was on the sideline, and all the kids came over, and I explained it to them. I said, "Hey, this is what Coach Bob is doing." I said, "This is what I need. No worries." I said, "And I want to keep doing this because it's important to me, and I also want you guys to love the game, and I want to keep teaching you." So they loved all that, right? So I try to tell people that are on oxygen that it's not, and for lack of a better term, it's not a death sentence. Okay. It just is something you need that maybe other people don't. But don't stop living. You can't stop living on anything. And some people are weak. I get it. And I'm not saying that everybody can do it. But even if you're weak, you can find ways to move. Whether it's pedals, whether it's arms, where you're squeezing things with your arms, or a plastic ball or a rubber ball, or you're keeping your mind clear with reading or stuff. I chose to write, so I used to write a lot, and it just kept my mind fresh and also kept me very positive about those things. So that's one of the things I always told people is like, look, I used to go to some of the rehab centers where there's people that had oxygen. I'd stand up there and I'd be like, you know what? It's not a death sentence. Yeah, but Bob, when I walk to my car, it's like I'm huffing and I'm puffing. And I said, well, you're going to huff and puff, but it means that when you're moving, you probably don't have enough oxygen going in. All right. It means that your oxygen levels are probably dropping so quickly that you need to make sure that you understand that whatever exercise or activity that you're exerting, you need to, really supply or apply the right oxygen. That's why I always was in favor of tanks when I was doing something, because you could turn them up to the point where you had no issues with breathing. You know what I mean? So, and that's what I stood by for many, many years. And, I went through all the tests. I had spirometry all the time. I had all those things. I had the special medicines that I was on, until, it basically got to a point where my spirometry testings were continuing to come down, and it was time for the other journey.
As a respiratory therapist, and I'm sure Gina hears this all day long too, people don't want to become dependent on it. Well, guess what? You're already dependent on it.
Yes.
And people don't want to, they just don't want to have to carry a tank around with them. But you've got to. And if you can prove to people, hey, look, I water ski, I ski, you could do everything. You just, it takes a little bit of practice, but you can do it and still get out and have the life that you want. And so I love that you're championing this for people. So please
well, that's
go ahead.
What I'm trying to do. I really am. At one point, very early on, I was carrying 2 tanks. I had the 2-tank holder, and I was pulling that around because, if I was going somewhere, then I'd have to switch it, the tank from the tank. And then eventually, I don't know, I started getting a little bit better. And, then, 3 was good. But then anytime I got up to exert, in the house and stuff like that, I had the big compressor, and that was always around 6. So I knew that after testing, and that's the other thing I would tell people, is that if you get on oxygen in your home, okay, test your limits. And I don't mean like wait till you're in the 70s before you turn your oxygen on. That's not testing your limits. What's testing your limits is having your pulse sock on your finger, getting up from the couch or your chair and walking to the kitchen. Okay. Yeah. And watching the whole time where your oxygen goes, whether it goes down, too low, stop, adjust it. So I got to a point where I knew that if I had it running at 6, I could pretty much do everything in the house, unless I was cleaning, or I don't like to clean, but if I had to clean, I would need a little bit more, right? And that's where you got to understand your limits and not be afraid, like, oh my goodness, I'm on 8. Okay, I was on a 15-liter rebreather mask when I was working out, right up until I started evaluation listing for my double lung transplant. I remember the nurses saying to me, Bob, you don't have to do this. And I said, okay, but is it hurting me? And they go, no, we just watching you. And I said, okay, then I'm okay with it. I want to finish my workout routine. I want to finish, whatever I'm doing, elliptical, whatever it might be. And if I need a 15-liter rebreather mask to get it done, then stay by me and just let me finish my routine. And thank God I did. My legs were strong. And, then when I finally had to go through the evaluations, it was probably took almost a year to go through everything. Because they check everything, they check heart, this, that. I remember one time I went in there to see the cardiologist and the thoracic surgeon. Oh, this is a funny story. I got to come back. I don't know if I told you this one, Amy, but one of the gals that works there when I was there, she was like running a program. And it was one of those programs that when I was in the hospital, that someone would come by 3 times a day and get me out of my bed and make me walk. And I said, okay, I want to join that program. And so we started talking, and she slipped on me that she's from Michigan. And I just said, oh, I'm sorry. And she goes, what? I said, yeah, I'm a Ohio State fan. And she goes, oh. And she goes, oh, I see that you're going to see Dr. McCurry, who's the head of thoracic surgery at Cleveland Clinic next week during your evaluations. I go, yeah. And she goes, yeah, well, he's a big Michigan fan. And 2 of his boys have played for Harbaugh. And I go, oh, wow, that'll be fun. So I just kept in the back of my mind. Well, on that meeting the following week, I walked in, I had my OSU socks on, my OSU sneakers on, my OSU pants on, my OSU sweatshirt, and my OSU hat. And the nurse just kind of laughed. She didn't say anything and put me in the chair. So Dr. McCurry comes in, he looks right at me, blows by me, and goes over and sits behind his desk. And I'm sitting there to myself, oh, no way. I said, he thinks he's going to get away with that without a word? I said, he doesn't know Cowboy Bob very well. So then I went over and I said, oh, Dr. McCurry, I said, I'm sorry. And he goes, Bob, don't be sorry. I was late. I said, no, that, basically Ohio State owns you in football. And he goes, well, I said it a little bit differently than that, but we're being taped right now. So I hope you get the gist of it. And so then he turned around, he looked at me and he goes, should we talk basketball? I said, no, I'm not talking basketball. I'm talking football. All right. So for the next 45 minutes, we just talked about his family and his kids, and 2 of his kids had played for Harbaugh. And I remember their names, McCurry, and they played, and it was just a lot of fun. So the time there was probably a good year by the time I went through everything. And then after you get, then it goes to the board and the state, then this. So they determined that I needed, my next journey was double lung transplant because, it was just going too low. And all the medicines that I've been taking weren't going to really create any quality of life going forward. And it was, I'll tell you, people that are contemplating, and I talk to them all the time, I'm like, it's scary. You've got an anxiety that's really, really high. You got a whole million things going on in your mind. Like, okay, what's going to happen? And the thing that gets you, this isn't a fix. Okay. I will have chronic rejection someday. And I hope it's 20 years from now. I have no control over that. Doctors have no control over that. But you will get it. It doesn't fix you, right? But it gives you a better quality of life. So I was hemming and hawing a little bit. I kind of was leaning more towards it. So my oldest son called me and he's talking to me. He goes, Dad, he goes, all right, let's talk about this for a second. I said, sure. And he goes, so you have scarring on the lungs, right? And I said, yeah, you know that. And he goes, there's no cure for scarring on the lungs, right? And I go, well, you also know that's not happening anytime soon. They are doing lots of studies. There's a lot of mice that they're using. But I said, no, it's not going to be fixed anytime soon. He goes, then what are you waiting for? I said, why wouldn't you take this opportunity, or why wouldn't you take this chance? Because if you don't take this chance, there's only one way it's going, right? You're not going to be here. We don't know how long, but the bottom line is you're not going to be here. And you're not going to see your grandchildren. You're not going to see friends. You're not going to see this. You're not going to see that. And I said, yeah. And right then and there, I called the nurse up 2 minutes later and I said, look, I'm all in. Let's go get this done. And, then all that anxiety and that craziness, I thought, went away. And everybody needs that, because when you're told that you need a double lung transplant, just like when you're told that you need oxygen, unless you've lived through it, it's kind of hard to really explain it to people. The anxiety, the doubt, the worry, the concern, the thoughts that go in your mind all the time when you're sleeping, when you wake up. I used to have to wake up in the middle of the night and write it down because I couldn't get back to sleep. And that was an old trick I learned when I was doing all kinds of stuff in work. You wake up with work and you're like, oh God, I got to do this. But I would write it down, clear my mind, and then I could fall back to sleep.
Bob,
right?
Can I interject a question?
Sure.
How
Yeah.
long was it? So you had your journey with ARDS and so on and so
Yep.
forth. How long was it from the point where you felt like, okay, I cannot breathe, until you got your diagnosis of fibrosis, pulmonary fibrosis?
How long? Well, that's a great question, because in the beginning we were kind of, trying to stay humorous, because every time I seemed to go, every day they came in and visited me at my bed, it was like a different acronym. They had, first it was like, well, maybe you have COPD. Okay. So they did tests on that. Then it was like, well, then you had interstitial pneumonia with autoimmune features. So that was it, IPAF. So it was COPD, IPAF, 42 infectious disease tests that all came back negative. So from there, that was a couple years. And then eventually, I think I would have to say probably around the third or fourth year, 4.5 years, because that's when my spirometry started going down. And, they were looking at it, and then it showed decreases. And that's when I think Dr. Mehta, who was my pre-lung transplant doctor, had said, yeah, that now we're in IPF. So probably a good 3 years, because they were trying to figure it out, because I was okay on oxygen, right? But I always asked him, I said, so what's the next move? I said, well, if it gets any worse, you're probably looking at a double lung transplant. Now, I will say this. In the very beginning, Dr. Hyland was my pulmonary fibrosis doctor, and she told me early on that she didn't think I was going to get out of the hospital without a double lung transplant in the beginning. There was already, and I remember Dr. T coming in, I met him later on when I had it, but he came in and explained, and he just said, we're looking at it. And that is a scary one, because when it's an emergency double lung transplant, it gets a little bit hairier and a little bit more reason for concern. But I have a good friend that just went through, he was having problems, and I went and saw him and talked to him, blah, 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 during that summer. And then almost 3 months later to the day, he had an emergency lung transplant.
Wow.
But yeah, he wasn't, I tried to educate him on, he was out there in the crew, he wasn't wearing oxygen. People need to understand that it's not like, okay, and as a respiratory therapist, correct me if I'm wrong, but if you wait till your oxygen drops to 70 and then you stop, and you do that enough times, you are just in the risk of hurting your other organs in your body. You can't do that. You have to be aware of what particular exercises or events you're doing that put you in that situation. So if you're going to go out and walk the dog, my other friend Mike down in Florida that I've been working with him too, he was walking his dog and he would call me and I'd say, Mike, what's your oxygen right now? Finally, I got him to carry the dumb thing. He goes, it's 78. I said, sit down. And I said, what are you doing? He goes, well, I got my pulsator. I go, your pulsator of 5 or 6 is like equivalent to about 2.5 flow. And that's about it. You need more than that, Mike. You can't wait till you jump in the 70s and stop, right? So that's what I found a lot of people when I was working and coaching with them is like, you got to be aware that you can't wait until your oxygen drops. You don't want that to happen. You want it to be in the right amount of oxygen for the event that you're undertaking so that you're safe. Because you could pass out, right? You could pass out. Someone could find you 10 minutes later. Your dog's running loose and you're laying on this. And I kind of scared him. I said, Mike, someone could find you passed out on the grass and your dog could be running all over the place. He goes, really? I go, yeah. I said, don't mess with it. Make sure that you have the proper oxygen. So as things went on, I lost, that ability to keep my oxygen where I needed it to be. So I had to, unfortunately, the last, 8 months, it was getting to a point where I had to carry 3 tanks with me to play golf. And that just wasn't fun. You're doing tanks and 40-foot cords and jumping out there. And that was the only time that I just turned around and said, okay, I got to be realistic here. All right. I got to find some other activities. And this is after I already knew that I was doing the evaluations and I was hoping that I would get listed.
Hi, I'm Kelly, a registered respiratory therapist with Blue Zone Health. Do you feel breathless much of the time? Are you unsure of how to manage your breathlessness? Is it keeping you from doing all the things that you would like to do? I'm here to help you learn to work with your healthcare team to come up with a plan that will work for you. There are lots of tools, tips, and tricks and breathing exercises that you can do now that will help you breathe easier and more effectively. I look forward to joining you on this journey and empowering you to breathe better.
It's good that you kept your exercise up and kept yourself strong, but also recognizing, what, this golf thing is just too much. I'll play later after my transplant, but for now, let me find some things to stay active, because staying active and keeping your muscles strong and staying limber are the things that will help you post-transplant. That more than anything, right? If you just give up doing anything and you let your muscles atrophy, then the post-transplant recovery gets really difficult. But I wanted to go back to something you said about your son. When your son called you up and said, okay, Dad, let me get this straight. This and this, what are you waiting for? So it sounds like you had a pretty good handle on the information. You knew what was happening. It sounds like he had a good handle on the information. So what about the rest of your family, your friends, your neighbors? How much explanation did it take on your end for them to finally understand what you were going through and what you were looking forward to?
That's a great question. My son, now he works in healthcare, so it was easy. He worked with so many, he was a medical device guy. He worked with Stryker. He worked with some other companies, right? So he was very aware of some of that process. Now, lung transplant was obviously new to him. But he took the time. He asked his doctors that he knew, people that he knew, so that he could come back and talk to me, right? The rest of the people, even my family, couldn't understand it. Some of them, believe it or not, didn't even know that we could do that. It's relatively new. I think the first lung transplant was somewhere around the 80s, I think. Or if not before, I think it was around the 80s, but it's come a long way since then, right? But a lot of people never even heard of it. Like I've even said to some people, they go, wow. And they started talking and they said, oh yeah, I heard that you had a double lung transplant. And I go, yeah. And they go, I didn't even know we do that. And I go, yeah. I said, it is an option. It's one of the most difficult surgeries prepared and done in the world today, but it can be done. All right. And it's a real, they want to make sure the outcomes are right. They take the time to make sure that you have the best possible outcome. Right. And there's a lot of people say they do it, which is fine. But there's a lot the Cleveland Clinic, there's probably 3 or 5 within the country that are probably renowned for it, which I'm lucky. You know, it's half an hour from my house, and they're one of the best in the country, right? There's a lot of people that have come from other parts of the country to come to the Cleveland Clinic or Duke or New York City to get it done, right? But people, even, it's kind of hard. I don't want this to sound like I don't appreciate, but I don't think a lot of people really understood what it was I was going through, to be honest. From the mental aspect, the physical aspect, you know, they love seeing the scars. That was great. But I don't think they realized, you know, up to that point, making that decision, all the work that went into like another 12, 15 months to get myself back into the shape I wanted to be in, to be able to do and live a life that I felt I was ready to live now, because of it. And it was a lot of questions, you know, but they got onto it. But even today, I really don't know, even close friends, they don't really realize what I went through. And even today, sometimes what I might be going through, right? And all the things that can happen. And everyone thinks it's a fix, by the way. And I'm like, well, I'm not thinking about it, but it's not a fix. And I know I'm going to be the guy that they're going to be talking about that says I lived the longest with a double lung transplant. I just know that's going to happen, especially seeing a kitty cat with that wonderful tail going by. You know, it's that thing. And you know what? And it's okay. And if they want to hear me talk about it, I'm pretty good at it. I'll explain it to them, right? But I sometimes feel like I'm careful with who I share my journey with, because I don't want it to sound like, I don't know what the right word is. Boring, you know, to hear about the story. You know, some people, you know, you talk to them, they're like, oh my gosh, you know, how did this happen? Blah, 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 and all that. But there's some that are like, oh wow, you had double lung transplant. Cool. All right. So what are you up to now? You know, so it's like, you just got to like roll with the punches, right? Does that answer your question kind of?
Oh, absolutely, yes. Because I think one of the hardest things for people who are facing that situation of a transplant is, how do I explain this to anybody? Because no one else up to that point, unless they went with you to every doctor's appointment and were living with you all this time, really get it, what you had to go through to get to that point. And now that you've made a decision, if you want a transplant at all, now you're trading one issue for kind of a new life that has a lot of responsibility to it now in a different way. So as you mentioned, it's not a fix. Now you've got to keep track of medications, make sure that, you know, you've got a lot of balancing acts to do, and a lot of self-care routines and doctor's appointments, I'm sure, to maintain it. And I think the general public most definitely doesn't understand how much work that is. So you're to be commended for taking really good care of yourself through this whole thing.
Well, no, I appreciate that. Yeah, I think part of it too is, like, I have a buddy of mine too that he's kind of going through some of the cancer stuff now, but we're both athletes. And, you know, when you're an athlete, there's certain things that your mindset gets into. Like, I know I got myself a little bit in trouble in the beginning, because when I was doing PT and stuff like that, I was thinking, okay, like, if you're getting ready before a big soccer game and you're a couple days ahead, you might do that extra bench press, or you might do that extra leg press, or you might run that extra mile, or you might run this to get yourself ready for the game, right? You can't do that when you're doing oxygen, because if you go too far, it actually can not hurt you, but not help you, if that makes sense. Right. So you got to stay within the regiment. You got to be sure that you can do that. But my mindset was like, okay, well, if I'm going to get in there, I'm going to run like a mouse on a wheel. And then I'm just going to outrun this whole thing, and I'm going to make myself better. Right. And they were like, well, Bob, you know what? Love your attitude, but you can't do that. I said, this is not one of those things that you can do. So I had to adjust. So then I had different things I could do. So then I made sure that when I did this here, I also did exercise somewhere else, and I timed it properly so that I could do it. And when I did get tired to the point where I was like, oh, okay, this is crazy, You got to know your body, right? It's like your body's telling you right now, Bob, you have to rest right now. Okay. So stop what you're doing, sit down, rest, take a deep breath, meditate, whatever you want to do, but don't push yourself so hard that it's not good for you. All right. And that was a hard thing. It really was. I mean, the pain and all that kind of stuff, geez, I mean, yeah, I'm not going to say it was fun, but the pain didn't bother me as much because I knew that was going to be something that would eventually subside. That if I just didn't lift the weights and I didn't lift stupid things, I didn't do dumb stuff, I wouldn't have like to worry about stitches and blah, blah, blah coming apart like the straw man, right? I knew that if I just stayed with it and I understood my own boundaries, that I would be able to get through the pain, be the better for it, and be strong enough to continue to live the best life I possibly could live. All right. And you just got to worry, like, it's easier said than done, but I've really gotten to a point where it's like, I don't bog my mind down with things I can't control. How many times do we do that? Whether it's work, I have the healthiest of people I've talked to, and they're like, get so bogged down by don't sweat the small stuff. Or, if you can't control this or that, then put your energy into something that you can control. Your attitude, your balance of life, your diet, your workout, your this, your that, the things that'll make you feel better. All right. Beating Amy at paddleball or whatever that she plays. I mean, just get your mindset that, you get ready for that. Right. We never did have our match because unfortunately on my balance issues, I tried it and I can't do it. I'll end up having a broken ankle or something like that, but that's okay. If I can't do that, that's all right. But I really tried it. But, one of those things, you just got to realize there's certain things you can do and there's certain things you can't. But I love walking through the woods for 3 or 4 miles and shooting clay. It's great exercise and it's great mental telepathy. It makes you crazy. You get mad when you miss the stupid clay, but you know what? It's fun. And I'm getting exercise in and it doesn't feel like I'm doing anything more than enjoying myself, right? So you find those things that you can do. People out there, if they see this, they can call, they can talk. I'm always available. Amy knows how to get a hold of me. I love to talk to people. I want them to be aware that you just got to have the tude. You got to have the tude, no matter what. No matter what. That day you're feeling bad, dig deep and find that tude. Find a way to laugh. Find a way to remember. Pick up your phone. Look at some old memories with a phone and say, wow, that was a fun day. I look at my favorite spot, and that's a beach with a sunrise. So when I'm feeling ugly, I look at that and go, yep, I'm going to get there soon. And it makes me feel good, right? Because I've been there. And I love the beach. That's my place. And I get there as often as I can. But I have so many pictures that I refer to that that helps me when I'm meditating and just like, okay, I can sense it then. I can sense being on the beach, the sand all over my legs, the waves rolling in, all that kind of stuff. And then all of a sudden my mind just comes back to where it says, okay, bring it on. We're ready for the next step. We're ready to roll. Whatever happens, we're going to take care of it. So
that sounds fabulous. I wanted to ask you, Bob, and you've answered this quite a bit, but I'm going to throw it out there anyway. What was the one most helpful thing for you throughout this whole journey? Like, for example, people, support, doctors, medications, respiratory therapists. What was the most helpful thing that got you through this?
I'll tell you what, I've been blessed with some of the best doctors in the world, some of the best nurses in the world. I started a thing with the Cleveland Clinic a long time ago. It was called, when they had Nurses Week, we started a digital marketing program where a patient could fill out a card digitally to their favorite nurse while they're in the hospital. And they still do it. And it's a good thing because, the nurses I had were phenomenal. I mean, I'll tell you, when I first came out of that lung transplant, and I had these fairly young women crawling all over my bed. I hated to push that button saying I had to go to the bathroom, because then they would come in and I had all these jugs all over the place. They had to move them all around so I could go to the bathroom. They're sweating their butts off. And I'm like, guys, I'm not pushing that button anymore. This is crazy. And I remember the one nurse look at me and go, Bob, if you don't press that button, you got bigger problems, because I'm not coming in to change the sheets. Okay. You're going to lie in it. All right. I'm like, okay, I got it. But they were just so awesome. You know, friends. I'm so blessed to have good friends. I had people that came up and visited. I remember one of my nurses said, you know, this is like a winding door with you. You got too many people coming in to visit you. Are you tired? I go, no, I'm never tired of seeing my friends because it lifts me up. And she goes, that's great. She goes, I just want to make sure that you're getting your rest. And I said, I am. I had a guy that used to come in 3 times a week, a good buddy of mine, 2:00 in the morning, because he went to work, he went home, fed his family, did the thing, and he would show up at 2:00 in the morning. And I was wide awake. I'm still watching something stupid. And he would just sit there for like 2 hours and we just talk about everything. So things like that. My family, you know, obviously all my family supported me. But honestly, me being able to handle the ups and downs, the mental aspects, I can't stress enough how important it is. Even I've talked to people that don't have a disease, but I talk to people that work every day and they work so much and they have stress and they bring it home. And stress is one of the #1 killers in the world today. You can't live with stress. You've got to find a way to release stress. And it doesn't mean coming home and kicking the dog. It means that you got to turn around, find yourself a situation. You know, even if you have to sit in the car for 10 minutes, meditate, and get all those ugly things that happen at work, so that when you walk in that door, you're giving nothing but your best attention to your family, right? Easier said than done. I get it. I'm going to tell you right now, I learned it. And this was part of it. No matter how bad the day was, my kids come home from school and I visit them and they visit us. And I'm like, I wake up in the morning and I'm just like, okay, today's going to be a good day. And we go down and we talk about what's going on in their life. I talk about their challenges, their things, their stuff. So I think them being around was hard on them, because when it first started, they were triplets. So they were 5th grade, I think, all the way up through high school. And you know what? They were so focused and so good that every single one of them, when they graduated, were 4.0, and they all got scholarships at all the colleges that they went to. So they stayed completely focused on this. They didn't use me as an excuse. They didn't say, oh, my dad, you know, I'm going to let it bother me. Okay. I'm going to still, I said, look, you got your life ahead of you. Okay. Whatever happens here, I'm here to help you. Well, Dad, you need to help. I go, yeah, but the way you're going to help me is staying focused on your own life to make sure you're doing the best that you can all the time. So that mental idea of meditation, thoughts like that, got me through. But here's the thing, and this might be cruel, but I stand by it. We all have had it in our lifetime. We think about things that happen, the negative things. Okay. I don't hang around negative things anymore. I just don't. You learn, you know, there's a saying that says that when the seas are calm, everybody's your friend. But when the seas get a little stormy, that's when you really know who your friends are. The ones that will stand by you when you're going through the tough times that you're going through. They'll be the ones that check up on you. They'll be the ones that come by and be with you, talk with you. And I didn't need any of that, but it just happened. So then as I learned through these last 10 years or so, that I'm not going to live around negativity. I'm not going to be rude. I'm not going to be disrespectful. I just remove myself from the situation. I'm just like, okay, we're going to be negative about this, whether it's politics, whatever. There's a lot of that going on. I'm just kind of like, you know what? We all have a right to believe in what we want to believe in. I'm not going to get into a negative frame of mind. And that's it. And if I don't call them again, I'm not going to lose any sleep over it. The bad thing is it can be family too. Not that you cut them off, but maybe you just don't see them as much as you used to. Because every time you get there, you get into a negative type environment that makes you like this. I'm not like this anymore. Okay, I'm not going to let that happen. So I leave the negativity out and I bring the positive in. That was the biggest thing that got me through these last 10 years and will get me through the next 50 years, right? Because apparently I think I have 30-year-old lungs. So I plan on living to 150. So the thing is, I just can't let stress. Opal, she's sorry. That's my dog. She's a man eater. She's about 6 pounds. But she's a service dog. Anyway, that's the biggest thing is I try to remove the negative parts of my life. We all have them. But you know what? Even if you're not sick, think twice about it. Do you need to be around that negativity? Yeah, maybe it's part of your job, but you don't have to live around it. You certainly don't have to live around it. Does that make sense?
That is excellent advice, I think.
It does. Bob, I didn't get to say much. I was just fascinated with your story. And I just listed the things that, I think you could have complete episodes on ARDS, ventilators. I mean, being on a ventilator, oxygen tips, restrictive lung disease, transplants, pulmonary rehab, stress management, breath work, and the power of community and connection. Just so many topics that are just fascinating. So thank you so much.
Oh, I appreciate that. And I do that. I am very involved in the community still as much as I can. But, I'm retired. I'm like, sometimes I feel like I'm busier than when I was retired. The difference is I'm actually doing things I like doing. Not that I didn't like my work. I did. I don't miss the stress. I don't miss the negativity. I don't miss the CYAs. I don't miss that kind of stuff, right? But that brought me to where my mental strength and attitude is today, is that. I don't want anybody to go through the journey I went through, but if the opportunity is to have me live a better life for myself and others around me, I couldn't be more blessed than that. I want people to remember the good times they have when they're around me, not the ones about, oh, Bob, all he does is complain about, his lung transplant, this and that, No, I talked to Amy and Nick about it, but they asked me questions. If I remember, Amy, I just didn't open up. But I don't mind sharing my story. Even if it helps people, that is even a bigger plus for me. That's where the opportunity is, I think.
Well, you have had quite the journey, and I think you have one of the best tudes I have ever seen in my whole life with everything you've been going through. So you are just amazing, and we're so glad to have you on the podcast. And I think you're going to be a real inspiration to anybody who's going through concerns with their pulmonary health. So I'm so glad we had you on.
Well, I really appreciate you letting me be on. If there's anything I can help with you guys later on, another event, something you want to talk about, please don't hesitate. I love doing it. And if it helps people, I'm all for it.
Well, thank you so much.
All right, you guys. Well, listen, have a great rest of your week and a wonderful weekend, okay?
Yes, have a wonderful weekend.
All right,
thank
bye.
you again so much.
Oh, you bet. All right. God bless you guys. We'll talk
You too.
soon.
We'll be in touch. Thank you.
All right. Sounds good.
Thank you.
Hi, friends. This episode of the Cozy Lung Lounge is brought to you by Hootenanny Joy, where your health and wellness take center stage. At Hootenanny Joy, we know how overwhelming it can be to stay on top of your health, especially when life gets busy or chronic illness adds challenges. That's why we've created self-study programs designed to meet you right where you are. These programs are simple, flexible, and packed with tools to help you thrive. And they come with something extra, access to a live health coach. That's me, to guide you every step of the way. Whether it's improving your sleep, learning to nourish your body, or managing stress, our programs combine proven science with practical, real-life strategies. You can work at your own pace, get the answers you need during coaching sessions, and feel confident you're making progress. Ready to take that first step? Visit hootenannyjoy.com to explore the programs and choose the one that fits your journey best. Hoot Nanny Joy, because your health deserves a little joy.